Hello, and welcome everyone to the first webinar of Kvinna and Oxfam's co-organized webinar series. Before we start, I would like to indicate that the main language of this webinar will be English, and we are going to have simultaneous interpretations from English to Arabic and vice versa will be provided during the webinar. So just click on the below option to activate the interpretations, and you can find the icon that looks like a globe. So welcome again to the road to COP27, Advancing Gender Equality Through Climate Action, where we will invite feminist activists from around the globe to look at the connection between climate change and gender. My name is Samah Ilos, and I am thrilled to be your guide for this fabulous set of speakers and this conversation we're going to have today. Together, we will have in total 6 webinars where we will look at the connection between climate change and gender from various perspectives. And we're gonna have that until Thursday, the 7th of July. And again, there's the interpretation in Arabic. So please feel free to use that option if it's needed. For you all to know that the webinars will be on Thursdays, and as I mentioned before, it's going to be once a week. So as a note, today's event is going to be recorded, and once we finish the series, the whole series will going to be uploaded to Kvinna YouTube channel. And as well, we're going to have our Twitter account, so feel free to follow us on Kvinna me, and share with us as well your thoughts, your learnings, your reflections, your takeaways on the hashtag of Women for Climate Justice, and we will have it on the chat. Great. So today in our agenda, we're going to listen to 3 fabulous speakers. And at the end of the webinar, we're going to have approximately 15 minutes for questions and answers. Please feel free to take notes and indicate to whom your question is stated. And feel free as well to share with us your questions on the chat. I'm just going to emphasize again the interpretation icon that we have here and the option for interpretation. I'm going to mention that in Arabic. في عنا ترجمة فورية متزامنة مع الحديث اللي حيقدموه السبيكرز الموجودين عنا اليوم، وبتقدروا تفعلوا الترجمة عن طريق الايكون أو اللي موجودة على أسفل الشاشة اللي شكله شكل هيك كوكب العالم. Great, let's start. So climate change is the defining crisis for our time. The MENA region is projected to experience increasing temperatures, water stress, and an instance of extreme weather events with direct consequences for regional food and water security. Although women are rarely responsible for climate change, they are the first to experience its impacts. Evidence shows that climate change acts as a multiplier of women's existing vulnerabilities, structure, and gender inequalities, including women's unequal access to resources, and the insecurity of their paid labor, which leads them to experience climate change the worst and first. Climate change, unless addressed, will eventually contribute to the feminization of poverty and women's heightened vulnerability to climate fragility, risked and threatens the hard-earned gender gains in the MENA region. Climate change and climate justice should be high on the civil society's agendas, and those are human, security, and social justice issues. Therefore, civil society organizations should be supported to tackle climate change challenges, and they cannot do that effectively without advocating to place gender inclusion at the center of climate action, to address broader discrimination, exclusion, sociocultural barriers, and social inequalities that enhance vulnerability. There is a growing momentum of climate justice as a social issue among the international community. Civil society organization should seize this moment to leverage climate change action for agenda equality in MENA region. It is our task to understand the interconnection and break down the linkages. We are fortunate today to have many experts here with us in this room to help us understand the connection from many and different perspectives. So let's get started. And we are starting with the perfect guide to kick off this conversation. We have today with us our first speaker is going to be Dina Kaspi. Dina Kaspi is a program manager for the Regional Climate and Energy Project, MENA region, with the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung organization, working extensively with civil society organization, government, private sector, think tanks, research centers, and academia. All of that towards achieving climate justice, sustainable cities, and just transition towards renewables. She has over 12 years of experience focusing on environmental, social impact assessment, climate change, and protecting the ozone layer. Dina will speak about the climate change in MENA region and current challenges that we're facing and its implementation on sustainable development. So Dina, the mic is yours.
Thank you so much, dear Samah. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Good morning if there's anyone who needs a good morning, and good evening for those who also need it. First of all, thank you so much for giving me the chance to be with you today and one of the most amazing and close to my heart topics that I would love to talk about, and you're giving me the chance to do so. I'm just gonna check. Can you see my presentation?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So climate change in the MENA region. Maybe I can start with something a dear friend of mine once said, like, every once in a while we hear a buzzword. A couple of years ago, it was the Millennium Development Goals, then the Sustainable Development Goals, then climate change, and now sustainability, resilience, green growth, circularity of the system. All of these terms are perfect, right? And they emerge in a way where like everyone is taking a momentum to be the good person, the good country, the good interface of adopting to these terms and these agenda items. But at the end of the day, all of these are promoting for one thing, right? That we as human beings are actually good to our environment and planet Earth, right? That's the end result. And being that, it's impossible for you to tackle any of it without the 50% of whom is doing it or being affected by it, which is women. That's why gender has to be mainstreamed on all and every aspect of any implementation of any agenda on the national, international, or regional level. So, okay, it's not working. Sorry. Yeah, sure. But as a start, thank you for the introduction. For us as Friedrich Ebert Stiftung, we are the oldest political foundation, German foundation, and we've been working in the region for quite some time. But as for us, for the Regional Climate and Energy Project, as you mentioned previously, we work on three pillars, mainly climate justice, energy transition, just energy transition, of course, and sustainable cities. Our main aim is to actually provide an arena where everyone can speak freely towards achieving what's needed. So we try to make the link, build the bridges between government, civil society, research, and think tanks. And we always have a gender indicator along with youth participation because we can't go anywhere without them. We've been working in the MENA region for several reasons, but when we talk about climate change, MENA region is always on the top of the list. Why? So I'm going to start with the political instability. Unfortunately, the MENA region is the midst of whenever there's a distortion, conflict, war, that does not promote any development properly or in the linear or very progressive needed development. There is unfortunately a very, if null, trust between the government and the societies, civil society or research institutions. There's always this discontinuity of cooperation or discussion, as if everyone is know it best and everyone else is at the enemy line, which is why sometimes hinders the process. In our region, it's arid to semi-arid, which makes it more susceptible to land degradation and desertification. We have massive growth of population continuously, either like naturally or induced due to migration or wars again. The unemployment rates and poverty is on the top of the ladder when you discuss any of the circumstances of the MENA region. And the economy, like, unfortunately, most of the cases, when you discuss anything on the environmental, it's always taking a later stages, because economy is always the bigger rock, the bigger elephant in the room that we need to look at. And no other discussion is taking in the lead, because everyone is interested, how am I to support myself? How am I to cover my expenses, my import, my export, my economy? So all of that always sometimes tends to hinder the process of environmental and climate change SDGs and the development of green economy. So let me start with the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. We always heard that term. And so basically there's 17. And the basic element of it, the definition, it's super simple. So calling for action to end poverty, protect the planet, enjoy peace and prosperity. If you look at the SDGs with their diversity, it tackles every aspect of your life, every aspect of everyone's life, actually. So it goes for no poverty, zero hunger, affordable clean energy, and then we have 5, which is gender. And for the climate action, it's never disconnected nor separated from when we are implementing SDGs and vice versa. And we're just going to come to that later on. And for indicator 5 or the SDG 5, which is gender, I think at some point it has to be cross-cutting issue. Like, you can't go for affordable clean energy if gender equity is not there. You can't call for climate action if it's not a just climate action. You can't go for any of resources or no poverty if women are in the front lines and always being impacted by whatever adverse effects are there. And the worst part is that they are not in the decision-making process. So basically they're affected, but they're never given the role to actually voice out what concerns them. And then comes climate change. So climate change, the discussions of climate change back in '92 in the Rio Convention, where we said, like, okay, perfect. We need to tackle climate change under the United Nations framework for climate change, the Convention of Climate Change. So it is defined basically the direct or indirect human impact onto the composition of the global atmosphere. Simply put, we are producing so much CO2 emissions that the atmosphere is not actually able to accommodate, which shifts the climate into a severe conditions that we've been all facing and witnessing. If we want to discuss the objective, basically it's stabilizing greenhouse gas concentrations that are man-made. But then again, why are we actually making more emphasis on climate change now? We've been like 92, right? Simply because we see the impacts now, right? Every one of us, floods, fires, extreme weather conditions, allergies, we'll come to that as well. But everyone now knows the term climate change. Everyone now can link it to one of the impacts happening in his or her country. Everyone can actually make that like, okay, fine, it's actually impacting my livelihood. It's not just theoretical anymore. And this is why we are listening more, and governments are listening more, people are listening more, civil society are being more active, which is actually a good thing. Like, this is one of my favorite parts of the Paris Agreement. So basically the United Nations framework, it's more of an umbrella, right? And how to implement climate change modalities within the countries. There are several modalities. We started, or the most famous one was Kyoto Protocol. We said, like, okay, it's a top-down approach. Developed countries need to reduce X amounts of CO2 emissions. But then in 2015, we thought, like, this is not working. So we have Paris Agreement. Paris Agreement is the bottom up, saying like each country can actually emphasize or actually contribute to solving climate change. And in the preamble, acknowledging climate change is a common concern of humankind. And I would love to emphasize also on the obligations of human rights, the right to health, and people invulnerable, and as well as gender equity and intergenerational equity. So basically gender is specifically stated, and it has to be taken into consideration when tackling climate change. So we are, or generally, we need evidence-based solutions. Like, we can't go all the time theoretically. So the science behind climate change goes through the Intergovernmental Panel of Climate Change, the IPCC. So basically, they're the science arm, the technical arm that actually develops, analyzes, and recommends how impacts or climate change is impacting our countries and region. The last sixth report, the assessment report, it was alarming to the extent that everyone is paying attention now and trying to make a change, because it focused not just on mitigation, which is reducing CO2 emissions, but also on adaptation. So basically, the climate change is not a just issue, right? Those who caused the issue, the developed countries, industrial countries, they're not highly impacted by it as much as those who don't even contribute to the CO2 emissions. This is the debate where we say, like, there's an unjust transitions and unjust discussions that are happening, because at the end of the day, all of us are being impacted, correct? Yeah, to some extent, but us as vulnerable, we always say that we are vulnerable to climate change. So we need to adapt. And this report specifically focused a lot on actual adaptation for the ecosystem, biodiversity, the vulnerable communities. And there was a lot of discussion for the region of Asia and Middle East. And if you allow me, I'm just going to go for a couple of the discussions that were mentioned into this report. So we know, like, there's going to be a rising temperature. And some of the studies, some studies stated, like, if we go as business as usual and we don't do much in our region, the maximum temperature can reach up to increase of 7 degrees centigrade, which is devastating. So we have an increase in temperature. We have the precipitation levels are being variant, meaning that in some cases that we will have massive floods. In other cases, we will not have any kind of precipitation, leading to desertification, lack of water resources. And allow me to say, I am 100% convinced, this is my personal conviction, that the next war is going to be a resource war. It's not going to be power anymore, because everyone is struggling to meet up their demands and needs. Like now the discussion, the supply chain, how can you be more resilient? How can you be more not susceptible to any interferences that are external or internal? And for that, the problem is that also in our region, with the MENA region, most of our countries are actually susceptible to water scarcity because they are already like water scarce. Like surface water is not much, groundwater is either shared or cannot be like utilized in the context that we need it, or being overly utilized to the extent that it's not going to be sustainable anymore. And then we go to, with all these floods, heat waves, we have a major loss of infrastructure, roads, commodities, places, like actual physical losses. And not just that, with the massive fires that we've seen lately, there's a massive loss of habitats, and the biodiversity is being highly impacted, like animals, trees, all of these are being eliminated. Then we have the, one second, sorry. And then also there's a lot of studies making the link between health and climate change. So some of these impacts are actually having a direct link to the water and waterborne diseases. And some other studies demonstrate that they're the zoonotic diseases also. So like these diseases that are through animal, like they are transmitted to animals, basically because we invade their nature. So we are actually causing these diseases directly or indirectly. And then it's not working again. Yeah, then there's this very, very alarming term, which is climate migration. And in a lot of the areas, even the MENA region, we consider climate change as like a regional security issue, because not having resources, not having an income, it will cause tension, it will cause conflict internally, it can cause some issues with internal, especially if resources are shared, like water resources in the MENA region, there's so many aquifers that are shared between countries. So when you are in a dilemma that you don't actually have enough water, it's not the best interest of the other country that you will be taking into consideration, it's yours. So there's that much of a conflict. And then, of course, with all these increased temperatures, there will be an increase on demand for the air conditioning system. And let's be honest to ourselves, we're not doing much of a good job on energy efficiency, right? We tend to, like most of the cases, either like excessive cooling. And then going back to the water issue, we will be needing some unconventional water resources like desalination, which was like a massive requirement of capital costs and actual energy. So we are in this vicious cycle now, right? Like we have climate change and it's like directed towards more and more vulnerability to the population. So now there's this question, the SDGs and climate change, who superpasses what and whom's affecting whom. There's a recent publication by the World Meteorological Organization, and they made this nice paragraph and like graphs saying like, whenever you're tackling climate change, you're not tackling one item at as is. It's a cycle. Like if you are actually focusing on CO2 concentration, which is the main basic for climate change, you're actually tackling several SDGs. And same goes for other topics. And let me just, if you allow me, let's say that you said, Samah, at the beginning, women are most vulnerable, especially when it comes to economic development. Let's say the agricultural sector, for example. Most of the women who are working in the agricultural sector, they're underpaid. It's not a legalized sector, by all means. But the first sector impacted, and you can see the implications of climate change, is the agricultural sector, right? Shortage of water resources, the heat waves, cold waves, all of that affects the agricultural sector. Going one step back, we say that we need to include women in the economic activities, right? Perfect. One of the studies that we did, it stated that 47% of women in Jordan tend to not participate in economic activity due to the lack of proper transport system. Okay, perfect. Going to transport sector is one of the main contributors of CO2 emissions. So if we call for a proper transport system that is inclusive, that is friendly, that is resilient, we're actually promoting women's contribution in the economic cycle. So it's never an item on its own. It's a cycle. It's an actual replica effect that you need to do something right that will affect, hopefully, positive on the other. Let's take another example, which is the increase of temperature. So basically, it's all there. We know it, but like having it visualized makes it easier for us to make these connections. So once the temperature is increased, there will be water scarcity. There will be less agriculture and fishing yields. That will lead to livelihoods being impacted, and see how many of the actual SDGs are there and being impacted by climate change impact due to increase of temperature. So the point that I want to say here is that we can't take one item on its own. We can't take like just focusing on climate change per se or SDGs per se, or one SDG per se. It has to be a full cycle understood by whom is working in the field nationally and internationally. So what needs to be done? These are just simple ones. Like we always say and call up for resilient, inclusive, just cities, which whatever comes with that as infrastructure, transport, cities, energy efficiency, renewable energy, climate. We don't need just climate action. We need it to be just, and justice, like climate justice. We need to focus on green economy. And we always hear that term like building back better, which is perfect. Like this is an opportunity for us to rethink of how we are actually investing and we're like directing our economy towards. And then there's the term that everyone uses, the sustainability of all its complexity. It's actually targeting every and each project that we work on. How can we do that? These are just like random, very simple things that we need to do. So in our countries, we're so good at making strategies. We're so good at having laws documented, and they're just on the shelves, right? We need to stop that. We need to have these laws, strategies, studies actually implemented on site so that we can actually have an impact. Like I understand the importance of analysis and studies, but then again, I understand the importance of doing a project and building up on that and having a real impact and real development. We need capacity building, not just for the government. We need capacity building for the civil society, women, youth. They need to know their rights, and they need to know that they can have an actual impact, an actual the role in the change of all this that is happening. We need to invest in research and development, because most of our countries, we never do that. We tend to wait for the technology transfer to happen to us. Like smart agriculture, fine, by all means, but you know the know-how. It's your country, it's your circumstances. So it matters like better to do your own research and development and come up with your own solutions. Education is a massive, massive role and a game changer when it comes to climate change and sustainable development, especially for women. We always say that we need to equip women, we need to have them, but also we say like we have women in really in leading positions, perfect, by all means, but how much? What is the percentage? Like having one minister as a female with a cabinet of, I don't know, 20, 25, that's not representative. That's a good model, perfect, that we can build up upon, but still we need to work more on that. And then we need to work on investigating financial instruments. We always wait for the aid to come, development agencies to aid, which is perfect. But then again, you have your local banks, you have your local investments, build up their capacities to go for green bonds, to go for infrastructures that is green, to go for green economy. All of these needs, I'm not sure, I know they need work, but might as well just start doing that. One most important thing is actually cooperation, communication, because again, most of the time we don't talk to each other. So the government is doing something, civil society are trying to push for another, academics are always out of the picture. Development agencies tend to have their own agendas and they want to implement them in the countries. There has to be some dialogues that are on political, economical, and social levels. They have to take place locally, regionally, and internationally. That like silos work, it doesn't work anymore. We have to stop that. Maybe I was too dark, but there are some good signs for the MENA region. So like simple examples of where we're doing good. 6 of our countries in the region, they are aiming to be carbon neutral by 2050, not just as countries and parties or region and cities, but also companies, which is massive. That means that everyone is taking a role in the process. With nationally determined contribution, which is the political interface of Paris Agreement for countries and parties, a lot of our countries actually updated their NDCs to be more ambitious of reducing their emissions, which is massive. And a lot of them included the gender perspective explicitly in their NDCs, which is also a good indicator of how gender is taken into the climate agenda and the SDGs. Lately we've seen that topics of actually focusing on renewables, wind, hydrogen, there's been so much international regional dialogues on hydrogen, how to emphasize on that. There's a massive potential for regional cooperation with the nexus coming to water, food, and energy. There's also some initiatives when it comes to sustainable production and consumption. There's been some initiatives towards circular economy, starting with waste, which is the easiest that can be actually measured and duplicated for good practices. And then there's a lot also of the work of the electrification of our traffics and transport systems, which is also combining between the energy and the actual transport sector into having it more sustainable and inclusive for our cities. In all of these, we always focus on the gender and try to have it in an inclusive manner. So I'll finish up with the good signs, and thank you so much, and I'll be looking forward for any questions. And I'm sorry if I spoke too fast, but can't help it. That's genetic. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dina. Thank you so much. So Dina shared with us about why MENA region is at the top of the list of a climate change from a political perspective, economical and social perspective. She also shared with us the sustainable development goals and how it's important to start with gender equality to be able to work with the other goals that we have in the list. She also shared with us other international agreements as the Paris Agreement and how can we learn from that and try to implement in our MENA region. And she also shared with us the impact of climate change on our region, things that we can see with our own eyes, but things that within the system as health, migration, energy, that we are going to see if the situation continues as it is, and why it's a full circle to work with the SDG goals. And she wrapped up with what can we do? And she also was optimistic by sharing us good signs of the work that we're doing so far. So please share with us. I can see that Anissa started getting the questions in the chat. So please share with us your questions, your thoughts, and then we will raise up these questions to Dina at the end of this webinar. And please indicate to whom is your question is directed. So we lift it up to our speakers. Thank you so much, Dina. So our next speaker is Lina Abu Habib, who will speak about why climate change is a feminist issue and the gendered impact of climate change on women and girls in the MENA region. Lina Abu Habib is the director of the Asfari Institute for Civil Society and Citizenship at the American University of Beirut. She is a feminist, activist, and researcher with a long career working with local, regional, and international institutions, including the Royal Tropical Institute. She has designed, implemented, and led multi-year gender equality initiatives, including training, research, and community actions, and served on many local and international boards, including AWID, where she served as the board secretary and chair from 2008 to 2012. Lina, the mic is yours. Welcome.
Shukran, Samah. Thank you. Before I start, I need to ask you to, once I go beyond 15 minutes, just give me a sign, just to make sure that that I don't take up the time of the next speaker. So I'm going to rely on you, Samah. When you started, Samah, you said, you have experts talking. I have to say that I'm not a climate change expert. I'm actually a climate change novice who's trying with other feminists to understand what is going on and basically to push our way into this space, which is rather recent, at least for feminists. And this is where my comments will go. I'm going to talk a little. Well, I'm going to first talk a little bit about the connections, at least in the region. But what I want to really focus on is where are we in terms of activism? What is the history of feminist activism, and why is climate change kind of a new, although a long time accruing crisis, but actually a newcomer in terms of the concern? And I want to talk about, in doing this, I want to talk about the patriarchal nature of many of our social movements in the region. So to begin with, in terms of continuing the reflection, but moving more towards, okay, what is the link? I just want to start by saying, this is, we've had a history of denying gendered impact of mega things. So we have a history of denying that the economy is gendered. We have a history of basically not wanting to see or insisting on identifying the market as something incredibly neutral, and all market players are neutral, and best person wins. And turns out that it's the best man actually most of the time, and that these structures are incredibly exclusive. And then when we started thinking about conflict, for instance, we had this, in general, we had this very firm idea that conflict affects people in the same way, and everybody suffers in the same way. And its conflict is neutral when it comes to, who is going to affect. And most recently, with the pandemic, some people used also the word the great equalizer, as if everybody has been affected in the same way by the pandemic. And we are repeating the same pattern of beginning with this false narrative and this very erroneous idea that this is a mega crisis, but everybody is affected the same way. And I think you both said in the beginning, women bear the brunt of all the different damages and consequences of climate change, but they were never the cause of it. Or in general, they were not sitting on these tables where decisions about extractive industry was made, where decisions about decimating large areas of the environments were made. And linked to this, and I want to link it also to the way gender-blind policymakers think about conflict in the situation of climate change. And I think our major problem is that, and particularly in the MENA region, is that women, at best, we're considering women as victims, same as we consider them victims of conflict, but not as actors, as effective change agents, as as economic agents and as agents who actually know better about managing the environment, about managing human natural resources, and their role actually is dismissed. Right. So let's focus a little bit more on the link, and I want to refer to a reflection that my young colleague Riham Qannout, who's with us, who's reminded us in a class with students that, for instance, take the situation of Syria. And this is a context that Riham knows very well. Take the context of Syria, and we're talking about conflict, etc. But we forget that right before conflict, there was a major drought, a drought that led millions of people out, people who were involved in agriculture and agricultural livelihood. Why is this gendered? Because we know very well, at least this is the data that we have, short of any other analytical data, but we do have data that says who works the land and who doesn't profit from it, and therefore who cannot be compensated, who will not be compensated because the property was never there. So when a major disaster, a major climate disaster like drought happens, causing migration, etc., then it's actually those workers who were basically working for free, because this is an extension of their care work, are actually the first to be affected, but not the ones who will be compensated as and when there is compensation. And also to continue on this, we forget that one of the major challenges, gender-based challenges in the region, which actually keep women and girls in their diversity shackled, are actually gender norms, repressive, oppressive gender norms, in a sense that mobility is restricted, and by restricting mobility, you are restricting women's choices and women's opportunities and women's ability to actually create and implement solutions. The other very important thing is that we also forget that because of these gender norms, women are responsible for livelihoods. By responsible for livelihoods, and particularly in areas where livelihoods depends on raw material from from the environment, it's women who have to make sure that they have access to these resources, to secure the livelihoods and also the health and safety of their families, securing livelihood, fetching food, fetching anything that will, the basics of life. Okay, so what is it that what are the other linkages that I'd like to point out to? And every time that I think about it, every time I really see the connection with the gendered impact of conflict. It's just amazing. And the reason why we have these parallels is that because these gendered impact are simply the ways in which a crisis, be it conflict or be it climate change or be it the pandemic, simply amplifies, exacerbates pre-existing social and gendered inequalities. So basically, for instance, the impact on women's health. And again, my young colleague just also pointed out to me the issue of refugees or the situation. I don't want, the issue makes it sound incredibly negative, as if it's a burden, but actually the situation and position and conditions of refugees, because of these because of these gender norms, women have very little mobility or agency. They have to stay in places with very poor salubrity. They have to bear nefarious gas emissions from different places. Plus, we know very well, our country, your country, folks, we know very well that poor people, migrant workers, refugee people are systematically placed in our countries in the most environmentally compromised places, in the dirtiest places, in places where water is not accessible, in places where pollution is high, and actually basically placed in rubbish dumps, to be very honest. So actually, I want to conclude this part and move to the last part by saying, same as the regimes in the MENA region have been always oblivious of social justice, they are actually consciously oblivious of, on the one hand, the gendered impact of climate change, but also in terms of, which kind of policy-oriented solution that would address. And I want to, maybe that's the last point on this one, policy-oriented solution that are just about, measures related to, something that will decrease our consumption or whatever, are actually creating more burden on women. So when we more burden in terms of their care work, just to give you a very sad anecdote from Lebanon, because of the economic crisis and so on, one of our brilliant, the current Minister of Social Affairs, who has probably a freezing IQ, it was actually asking women to start using disposable nappies and use, cloth instead. And of course, not thinking about who's going to wash this and who's going to have to deal with shit, basically, and who's going to need time and additional resources to be able to use sustainable, whatever it is, sustainable nappies and all of this. So the solutions that are put forward are actually solutions that do not work for women. They do increase their care burdens. My last point is going to be very brief. Samah, please tell me how much time do I have left. I want to talk about feminist movements, other social movements in the region, and then climate change. And for those of us who know who have been through the different iteration for a few decades, we know that ecofeminism as a school of thought is not yet well developed in the different feminist movements of the region as a kind of political activism and the feminist intellectual critique, which looks at feminism, which pulls together feminism, environmentalism, and also looking at the impact of rabid capitalism and neoliberalism in our region. This connection, this iteration of feminist thought is more or less recent. Why is it recent, and why? I don't pretend to have the answer, but just a few factors that come to mind. Same as in other parts of the world, there are histories, there's a genesis for each of our social movements, be it, social justice movement with trade unions or political parties, human rights movements, environmental movements, women and feminist movements. And these, I don't want to use the word siloed, but these have been kind of thought of in a hierarchy. Like, some are more important. Some social justice movements are more important than the others, and therefore, almost systematically in our region, they are male-led movements, and they are, they are based on specialization, if I may say, and they are based on a very patriarchal models of male leadership, and then let the women play their part somewhere else. The environment is too technical, and the economy is too complicated, and conflict, in any case, we've resolved it with the Women, Peace and Security and Security Resolution 1325. So that kind of hierarchy within social movement has meant, and also the fact that we have gone a long way from focusing on political participation and reforms of family laws, for instance, and then thinking more about gender-based violence, and then looking at what intersectionality means. So this has been the kind of iteration, but at a time when some of these other social movements, notably environmental movements in our region, I want to venture and say that they are impenetrable to feminist thought, or at least many of them. But the other thing is, and here again, I'll be finishing in 2-3 minutes, Samah. Here again, I want to draw from a kind of a recent example from Lebanon. This increasing form of what I want to call imposter feminism, and it's the same as the premises of the Women, Peace and Security paradigm, where women are seen as doves and very peaceful and peace builders. The head of the National Commission for Lebanese women, last year there were serious street fights, and she called on the mothers, because of their peaceful nature, to tell their sons to come back home and not to bear arms. So this is not just a quote. This is a narrative, and this is a narrative that reinforces the role of mothers as subdued, peaceful doves. And it is the same in terms of the environment. The same person also was calling recently for solving the climate justice, and it's quoted actually, and it's in the media. It's not even gossip, but calling for women to plant trees so as to solve the climate change, climate deterioration. So actually not looking, and this is what is scary, thinking that these assumptions that are made on very conservative gender norms and social gender norms are very, very problematic, because they totally disregard the structural inequality, gender inequality that exists. They totally disregard the results, which is in the form of great disparities in impact, and the fact that women are not, women and girls in their diversity are not there on the table to understand their narrative, to share and to voice their narrative and their kind of solution for this. And that would be probably my last point, I hope. Our last our last CSW 66, which was in March, and which rightfully so focused on gender and climate change, also came out with an outcome document, which is fine, but and I think I would say it's fine, and I would stop there. It is just fine. We all know that we pour our hearts and our soul and our time and our energy in this space, which is very important for us, which is probably our only global feminist solidarity space for advocacy. But we know at the end of the day that the document in the end is not binding. It doesn't have teeth. And then you get, the daughter of the president planting a couple of trees, and, she's done it. The country has done it for this. Plus, also in terms of imposter feminism, you know, some of us who just want to ride the wave and basically do just an activity which says thank you, just an activity which talks about gender and climate change. This, I have to insist that this is rubbish. You know, talking about addressing gender and climate change in gender and climate justice means addressing first and foremost the social relations of gender, the unequal relations of power, gender norms, and then secondly, knowledge production, our own knowledge production, our own, you know, using our own knowledge for mobilizing, and finally creating our own language for this. So thank you very much. Right on time. No, can you show me the timer?
Yes, you had 1 minute and 20 seconds left, Rosti.
Yes.
Right on time. Thank you so much, Lina. Thank you so much. So Lina shared with us a lot of information about why climate change is a feminist issue in the MENA region, and she touched in different perspectives. One of them was like social gender norms, and women as a livelihood servers, and the impact of women as immigrants, and how economic, and social aspects can impact and show how climate change is a feminist issue. And she also talked to us about the gendered impact of climate change on women and girls in MENA region from different perspectives. She shared different solutions that we're working with nowadays, and she also shared with us why these solutions are not effective enough and how can we develop it and work with it, and what should we prioritize to find effective impactful solution. Thank you so much, Lina, for sharing. And our next speaker is going to be Pax Spitzer, who will speak about the definition of climate justice and how climate justice is inherently linked to gender justice. Pax Spitzer is a senior lecturer in the College of Arts and Science at the State University of New York at Stony Brook. She studies women's leadership in climate change adaptation through environmental and gender equality strategies and oral histories. She is affiliated with the Women and Gender Constituency, a stakeholder group in the United Nations Framework Convention for Climate Change, and has served as a member of the jury for the Gender Just Climate Change Solutions Award in 2021. Welcome, Peg, the mic is yours.
Thank you so much. Let me see if I can share my screen here and get to here we are. Ta-da. There we go. All right, almost ready. Okay, so welcome. Thank you, everyone. I have to say that one of the things that I bring to the table is a definition and sort of perspectives on the intersection of climate justice and gender equality. I am a novice, to use Lina's term, in the Middle East, in the MENA region. And so the examples that I use, I think are mostly from Africa and some from Central America. I think you will see remnants, and I'd love to hear Dina and Lina talk about this more, of what is happening in the MENA region. So I will start by looking at what I plan to do here, which is first provide a definition of climate justice, and then talk about this intersection that I feel is very integral to our discussion today, and present field research from 6 different countries, and then recommend ways forward for women-led climate change projects. So climate justice defined, I think there are some elements that are very important to recognize. First, that it is the equitable sharing of both the burdens resulting from severe weather events and benefits of how we then deal with these events. And I think that's on a global level, very significant. To Lina's point, the idea of dismantling systems and practices are fundamental because of the structural inequities. and to respect, as Dina says, the intergenerational aspects of this, that it can't be just within one age group, and to understand that this is something that we need to deal with over the long term. And then also to include underrepresented groups. We've talked about women, but we also need to include in that Indigenous women, disabled women, LGBTQI plus women, and so forth. So this is a very significant part of how we define climate justice. We look at climate justice really as fundamentally paying attention to how climate change impacts people differently. As Lena mentioned, it is the ideas of what impacts women are very different from others, and unevenly and disproportionately, as well as trying to redress. And I think this is significant, and this is why we're all here today, really, the resultant injustices in fair and equitable ways. Okay, as we've talked about, in various regions of the world, colonization, unsustainable resource extraction, racial gender oppression, climate change is really rooted in these interlocking and very complex pathologies. So it is important then to recognize that we need to dismantle these systems, that we have to reform not only social, but political, legal, and economic structures to avoid perpetuating them, and to create new ones, to expose the root causes of climate change and address these systemic issues in a multitude of ways. So one of the things that's very interesting in research that's been done is to look at communities on the local level and encourage international exchanges to go beyond the conventional outreach. And I'll talk more about that, for mutual learning between what we define as the global north, if you will, developed countries, and global south, developing world. So there are three things the assumptions that we have to recognize. First, that women in the global south do suffer disproportionately from the disastrous effects of climate change, as you've noted. Secondly, that if we're going to optimize any remediation and adaptation, women have to be recognized, encouraged, and supported for their pioneering innovations. They have to be a critical mass for collective change. So I wanted to look today at field studies that were published between 2017 and 2021. Because I think that the field studies can be applicable to the MENA countries today. First, the top three takeaways, if you will, is that women's opportunities to lead a movement to change, for example, agricultural practices, adopt eco-friendly approaches, have been and are severely limited. No way around that. Secondly, that the current climate policies ignore women's deep knowledge of natural resource management and indigenous oral traditions. And third, if given the opportunity, I think it's clear that women can serve as intelligence gatherers, consensus builders, by developing productive relationships with different kinds of stakeholders in their communities. So here's my first study. I have 6 I'm going to present. Published studies. One is in Kenya. This was a study conducted among 156 households in rural Kenya, and it found that women do not support, that government programs don't support women in climate change initiatives. At the community level, they're hindered because they don't have access to land rights or capital. And on the flip side, this means that men are empowered in their communities to pursue the resolutions or agroforestry and conservation agriculture. And third, as a result of inequities, women focus on how to achieve a measure of financial independence and stability by creating safety net programs, either through individual or group-based income generating activities. through savings and loan and access to credit through women's organizations. So that's the study in Kenya. I know I'm moving fast, but I want to make sure that there's enough time for your questions. The second study focuses on Ethiopia. And in this case, women contribute more labor to their communities than men during droughts and famines. They do not, again, they don't have access to capital, and they don't have the power to make decisions to implement environmentally sustainable activities. And here's the key, I think, is as with the Kenyan case study, they do lack land rights. But here's a fundamental issue, and this is self-confidence. That lacks self-confidence as well as the financial resources, a theme that I will again return to. In the field study in Malawi, not myself, but researchers interviewed 425 Malawian farmers. And in this study, they found that although women were the ones to develop informal networks, the men made the final decisions as to whether the techniques would be implemented. So that was interesting to note here, an interesting insight in this study. And also that while women's power to make change is limited, really ironically, they're more inclined than men to participate in programs that first build community and collective identity, that make visible agency and capabilities in different ways, to visualize diverse and differences in unity. Going back to Lena's point, especially, and also Dina's point, that it's the visualization and the differences in unity that are very significant. In the fourth study that I want to look at in Ghana, researchers found that, again, in interviewing men and women and defining their roles in society in these communities, that men describe themselves as the providers, the hard laborers, the family finance managers, where women were portrayed as dependents, who relied on men to provide for them. And as a result, only performed very circumscribed labor-intensive tasks. So that while men adhered to the traditional roles as heads of households, they were also the first to gain access to the climate adaptation strategies. And women weren't, I think this last point is so very significant in Ghana, because you look at women laborers, they're not allowed to, they don't have the time or energy to pursue and really be recognized for as being part of humanity. I know that's a strong statement, but it seems very, very clear in this study in particular. A fifth study in Senegal, this was a 5-year pilot project which examined the Decentralized Climate Funds initiative. Here we kind of get now into some mixed results that I think are very interesting to look at and think about as relates to the MENA region as well. You see that younger, less educated women who followed indigenous religions had a harder time developing that confidence that I mentioned earlier to voice their needs. In 2 geographical regions in Senegal, women's collective empowerment actually enabled them to increase their bargaining power in both their communities and their households. In another region, women felt self-conscious and were reluctant to engage in discussions. And in some areas, there was significant cost for women, whether it's in terms of being denigrated or simply that they just couldn't handle the heavy workload that is involved in not only participating in community affairs, but also the labor involved, as Lena mentioned in her example of the changing of different types of nappies. Who's going to do that? In the last study in Nicaragua, the government's climate policy here merely reinforced what we call hegemonic masculinities and patriarchy, has been mentioned previously, and as a result undermined women's confidence in their abilities to implement climate change adaptation projects. So the climate policies ignored women's deep knowledge. Women do have deep knowledge of natural resource management and indigenous oral traditions. And in this particular study, the field researchers concluded that the only way to change the status quo was through a systematic transformation within the government to alter climate change politics. This is significant because many of the studies look at local levels, but understanding the role of government is also significant. So to change the status quo, it means that you have to identify and incorporate feminine perspectives into existing male-dominated hierarchical organizations. Absolutely. To confront inevitable challenges with sophisticated communication skills, of which women have many, to break down the binary, the either-or thinking, by proposing multiple solutions, and finally to cultivate, as I mentioned, the intergenerational, which Dina also mentioned too, the future generations of female leaders. Now, deep breath. You can expect roadblocks. A woman may have to be much more knowledgeable and more expert than her male colleagues to have her worth really recognized and accepted. And secondly, her experiences may be directly applicable to lots of things: racial, religious, caste, class, other obstacles to egalitarian opportunity and leadership roles, as well as to the gender dimension, which is why this Venn diagram kind of shows this intersecting and interlocking, if you will, pathologies. So what we need to do is recognize that women in traditional patriarchal societies are not apt to take on the same types of leadership roles as their male counterparts. First, there's a safety in numbers strategy that women may approach a male supervisor as a group to confront inequity and interrupt male-only meetings to express their ideas. These are sort of a safety in numbers kind of idea. And second, I'd really like to sort of break down a little bit more of what Dina mentioned about the educational system, because I think educational system is structural. And you have to, it seems to me from the studies that I've done, that the redesign of an educational system to start incorporating experiential learning immediately brings in women's expertise. Looking for teacher volunteers from other countries, reforming the structures to provide some technical training, offering women empowerment training, very important, especially in the MENA region, as you can see, during periods of conflict and reconstruction, involving men and women together in community training initiatives, organizing public awareness campaigns, and attracting outside support from colleges and educational institutions in the global north. So looking at COP26, the conference of parties that was with the climate change conference that happened in Glasgow in November, the Women and Gender Constituency, which is one group that's part of the United Nations Framework Convention for Climate Change, posed these key demands. And I wanted to just show them to you so that you kind of get a sense of what is happening on the international UN level to fulfill human rights in the Paris Agreement, to deliver on finance priorities, to ensure human rights, advance a gender action plan, reject the false solutions, that is the things as the planting of the trees, if you will, and invest in gender just climate action, to facilitate a regenerative economy, to invest in resilient gender transformative education, promote health, including sexual and reproductive health and rights, ensure rights to water, which is fundamental to all regions. We really appreciated Dina's pictures, visuals on that particular point there. To understand the focus on coastal ecosystems and local communities, and to ensure collective women's land rights. I'm just going to leave you with one solution. As the speaker mentioned, I was part of a jury through the United Nations Framework Convention for Climate Change at the Glasgow Conference, in which we reviewed about 155 really great projects that were female generated through the Gender Just Climate Solution. And one of them was a project that we awarded. We only awarded 3 for the 155, and one of them was in Turkey, and it was called Solar Age: Empowering Refugee Women Through Solar Engineering. Very interesting a particular project, because the Solar Age project essentially supported those very refugees that Lena was mentioning, Syrian women, refugees who went to Turkey. They gave the project provided theoretical and practical training in solar energy, which benefited the women refugees. Among them, about 20 of them were taught how to build solar batteries, which were then used on the local market to generate revenues for the women. The batteries also were used to provide needs for the refugees. So they integrated the flashlight SOS signals, very important, of course, in places with dangerous places, and to serve as an autonomous source for energy for mobile phones. So essentially, the program offered educational and language courses, not only to women, but also to the children. So if you're interested in the field studies, I, of course, provide this presentation to you. These are the field studies that, again, I did not conduct these field studies, but I've done significant research on the field studies and the conclusions that they drew through the various countries. Okay, I hope I was not too very long in my presentation.
They have not been. Thank you so much, Peg, for sharing. You talked us through the definition of climate justice and speaking the truth, showing the women's role in on climate justice. And you shared as well with us 6 different field studies that shows how women can take the role in impacting positively regarding the climate justice challenge in their societies in different countries in Africa. And you also showed that these studies can be implemented in the MENA region. You also talked us through the couple of solutions and how women's resources and power that they can bring together to bring change in their societies. Thank you so much for sharing. I want to invite everyone as well to share with us their questions that they would like to share with our speakers. And we have a couple of questions already for you all, but we can start with Dina. Dina, there was a question on the chat when you were mentioning how people can impact positively in their civil societies organization work, but there was one question. It was like, on a personal level, what do we do as individuals to reduce climate change?
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the question as well. So basically, like, countries are individuals, right? And communities and societies are individuals. So it's the core of whatever we do. So you being as an individual, good human being towards your environment makes a whole of a difference. Your choices on a daily basis makes a difference. You can be solely energy efficient, right? You don't have to be that consumption human being all the time. You can ride your electric vehicle car. You can actually promote for better education. And for us women, I'm sorry if I'm being prejudiced here, but we have the major role. Why? Because due to societal that bestowed upon us that we are the responsible for raising our kids, isn't this where we can actually promote best? Like the way you raise your kid to be more environmentally aware, not just that, the way you raise your kid to be not superior, because he's a male, he's superior to his sister, which happens a lot in the region, right? So just starting by the basics, you can achieve that. Not just that. Most of the activist work is done bottom up, as individual cases, as support through choices of where you are actually being part of. For example, most of us work in offices, right? Why not go for recycling system? Simple as that. Or how can we do some renewable energy projects if possible? How can we invest in community-based projects? How we can revive the neighborhood concept? How we can be more of a social human beings that are towards more sustainability and more equalism and more inclusive. That social network is massively important in the discussion of climate change. Maybe I'm being too optimistic, maybe I'm being too idealistic, but I honestly believe that these simple changes on individual level have a bigger role in some cases. And most of the discussions and most of the projects, when they are like bottom up, they tend to be more sustainable and can be directed towards a longer path. And thank you. Lena, I think Lena is raising her hand.
Thank you, Dina. Please, Lena, share with us or build it to what Dina already mentioned.
Actually, I may want to depart from this because I think placing the onus on the individual and then in a way where we think everybody is in the same boat, has the same opportunities, entitlement, can make choices. Being able to make choices is not a normal thing. It's not. It so much depends on people's positionalities, who they are, where they are. Are they poor? Are they rich? So I would think that even the idea of I mean, it's fantastic if everybody can have an electric car, but we know very well that this is not the solution. This technically sounds right, but the idea is, unless we address the structural social injustice, nothing is going to change. Green economy and all the wonderful things you can do with recycling, which I'm sure all of it works. But at the end of the day, the system is biased, and the system treats people in a different way, and women bear the brunt because they are the ones who have the least choices, who actually have the least mobility, who are burdened with care and social reproduction. And I'm talking about women, and I don't want to be, bound or shackled by the more oppressive binary system. But even us as feminists, it takes time for us to work on our language. But people are not affected in the same way. People who work the land but do not own it or do not control it or do not benefit from the profit from it, if they don't have choices at this level, we cannot ask them, and this goes back to blaming the poor for overpopulation and blaming migrants and refugees because I'm sorry, this is abrasive, but I have to say it, blaming them for being dirty and blaming them for having too much children. Without a proper social analysis of the structural forms of oppression, violence, and discrimination, there is no way we can address climate justice. Climate justice in our region is part of an overall system, a very ingrained, very powerful system of justice, and it's the reason why we're having this conversation is because we know by now that it's not a technical issue. It's an issue that needs political mobilization, political solution, political awareness, and also, how do we work so that everybody has agency? Everybody has agency and has that, amazing luxury to make a choice, and not everybody can make a choice. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, Dina and Dina, for sharing your thoughts on that. Lena, we have a question as well for you, so we can build into what you already mentioned. I was like, why do women rights organization and civil society activists still think of climate agenda as a foreigner or a Western agenda?
I don't think this is the case. I think every time you bring anything feminist, it's conceived rightfully so. I'm sorry, consciously as a foreign quote unquote agenda because there is a lot of benefit that is drawn from the patriarchal status quo, and I think I think, at least for me, I've decided as a feminist that we really don't need to justify our agenda, whether it's foreign or not. We really don't need to justify our funding. We really don't need to justify whether our ideologies are homegrown or imported or influenced. What we have is the compelling data of the ways in the lived experience, the different forms of lived experiences of gender-based oppression that women and girls in their diversity go through in our region. So being undermined as a foreign agenda, being undermined as as anti-local culture, whatever, you know what, if the local culture is harmful or part of it are harmful, it shouldn't stay. Anything that continues to the detriment of the dignity and well-being and health and happiness of everybody shouldn't exist, including policies which are influenced and actually informed by oppressive mindsets.
Thank you, Lina. I would like also to mention that people are asking of getting the reference to the field studies that you have already mentioned and sharing the slides, and you will share that with them, right?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Cool. Thank you so much. We will wrap up with the final question that was not answered to you, Lina, as well. Back to you again. The question was, what does the fact of having COP in Egypt and the fact that the latest or the last CSW focus on climate justice did for feminist activism in the region? Do you see this emerging interest a buzz, or is it going to have long-lasting effect on the feminist movements in the region?
Thank you, Samah. I actually noticed this question, and I want to thank whoever asked it, the anonymous person who asked it. I think that I know we have amongst us Sun Yang Yun and also my dear friend Hadil, who both know how committed I am to global feminist spaces for advocacy. And that's why, I don't care for the I don't care for the accusation of being foreign or not. I think as global intersectional feminists, we share a lot, and our mobilization must be global. So I'm very committed to both these spaces and others. The issues that I see with this is with COP being in Egypt under the sponsorship of the Egyptian regime. This in itself is excluding independent intersectional feminist groups from being there. I mean, we know that the space is going to be controlled like any other space. So actually accepting the fact that we're having such an important conversation in a controlled, securitized space, I think raises a serious issue. For the CSW, which I really think through NGO CSW New York, which for me, it's a major, something of major importance to be in that space and to continue to advocate and to lobby in that space. And also a shout out to Sun Yang Jung, because this is, who's with us, and we do have the CSW NGO New York, just to basically, thanks to her long lasting efforts, and just basically for our voices to be heard. my take on this, first of all, just 3 points, and I'll shut up. One is that, yes, high time to talk about gender and climate justice in CSW. This is truly amazing. Secondly, I think the deficit or the gap is, how does it link with COP? How does it link with other human rights spaces? How does it link with the, so I think we always felt that CSW is important as such, that it must never be isolated from these other spaces where we're having these conversations. It's not, I don't see, and maybe there is, and maybe Sunyan could correct this, but I don't see a very strong bridge between the conversations at the CSW on climate justice, which happened just 3 months ago, and the conversation in Cairo, or any other conversation. So maybe I think it's on us as activists, feminist activists in civil society, in academia, to basically think about how we can be that bridge, how we can facilitate these discussions, because as feminists, the more we strengthen our voice, our collective voice, and our collective mobilization, the better.
Thank you so much, Lina, for sharing. It's time to wrap up our session. And by that, I would like to remind you about what we have talked about today. Dina have talked us through climate change in the MENA region and the current challenges and its implications on sustainable development. And Lina spoke to us about why climate change is a feminist issue and the gendered impact of climate change on women and girls in the MENA region. And we finalized by Peg, who shared with us about the definition of climate justice and how climate justice is inherently linked to gender justice. Thank you so much, Lina, Dina, and Peg, for sharing your knowledge, experience, and wisdom with us. It was a pleasure having you in our webinar. And I want to as well share with everyone that I saw a lot of questions regarding capitalism and imperialism and about patriarchy effect on climate change. And on that, I want to share that in the next webinar that we will have next week, we will focus on understanding the connection between climate change and women's economic participation. And we will host remarkable speakers from Women Budget Group and the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung and the Ejidad de Género and the Bean Association for Environmental Development to speak about capitalism and patriarchy, climate change, and women's economic participation, feminist alternatives to green economy, and the feminist action nexus for economic and climate justice. For everyone, I want to thank our participants, and I want to remind you, if you would like to know more about our webinars, our speakers, and please follow Kvinna till Kvinna MENA account on Twitter. On the account's name, the Twitter account name is Kvinna Me, and share with us, please, your thoughts, your ideas, your takeaways, your questions on our hashtag Women for Climate Justice, and 4 is number 4, not for the word. And I want to thank again our speakers for today, and I want to thank everyone for coming and joining us in our webinar. And I want to say that see you all next Thursday on the 9th of June at 3 p.m. Jordan time.
Thank you so
everyone.
much for a wonderful moderation. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yalla, bye.